Good morning, and welcome to a new Getting to Know Japan webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we are joined by Mr. Robert Whiting, who will be presenting on gamblers, fraudsters, dreamers, and spies, the outsiders who shaped modern Japan. Mr. Robert Whiting is the author of several successful books on Japan, including the best-selling You Gotta Have Wa, Tokyo Junkie, and Tokyo Underworld. The Gamblers, Fraudsters, Dreamers, and Spies is his latest. He is also the recipient of the 2023 Chadwick Award. Just a kind reminder to refrain from turning on your microphones during the duration of today's recording and presentation. Additionally, we're also sincerely sorry for starting a bit late today. Mr. Whiting, thank you once again for joining us this morning. I'll let you take it from here.
Okay, thanks a lot. So you want me to start now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. This is a talk about my latest book, Gamblers, Fraudsters, Dreamers, and Spies. It's a book that covers 80 years of history in Tokyo from the early post-war days to the present by looking at stories of a wide swath of fascinating characters I was privileged to know or learn about over the years. These are individuals who made a memorable impact on Japanese society. There are 15 chapters in all covering the adventures of undercover agents, gamblers, con artists, nightclub managers, sports figures, and other oddballs. Are characters, opportunists who made their mark on modern Japan. This was actually the book I set out to write in 1990. But then I met Nick Sapetti, whose story was so spectacular it became the entire book of Tokyo Underworld. This also formed the basis of a sequel in the Japanese language called Tokyo Outsiders, published thereafter, which I've been working on and off over the years. The Japanese language edition, an earlier edition in the Japanese language of this book came out in 2001, and I thought I would be smart and save it for a movie that was being planned by DreamWorks and Steven Spielberg. The movie was delayed for 7 years, and they finally dropped it after writing 15 different scripts. Then it went to Warner Brothers with Martin Scorsese. Was going to direct, and they had a script and were ready to go. And then Paramount, which had taken control of DreamWorks after a joint venture went bad, sued Warner Brothers to stop production. And then it went to HBO, and after that, Amazon Prime and Legendary Global, and now it's at a Japanese company called K2. They say they have $100 million to produce a 10-hour series, but we'll see. So anyway, I turned 80 recently, and I decided I better finish this book now as fast as I can because I might not get the chance later on. Okay, so setting the scene with this book, next slide. This book starts with the end of World War II, and half of Tokyo was destroyed, with a few buildings in the center of the city left standing for use during the occupation. Much of the damage was done on the night of March 10th, 1945, when over 100,000 people, mostly civilians, were killed in an American bombing raid. Many were burned alive, and 1 million were left homeless. It was said to be the most destructive single air attack in human history. Next. That one. Gaetano Falauci, a famous war photographer, took this photo of the U.S. Army entering Tokyo from Yokohama.
The grand climax of 3.5 years of grueling fighting is reached as members of America's historic 7th Regiment of the 1st Cavalry Division enter Tokyo, and General Chase congratulates Private Davis, 1st GI in the Jap capital. With the precision of a well-oiled machine, the occupation rolls into the city. The children have at least been taught the correct signals. No chances are taken, however. Full battle equipment is the order of the day. Appropriately, the regiment which fought under Custer adds luster to its record in this historic moment. The hour for which all America waited and prayed approaches as General MacArthur's car enters the American embassy grounds, and the Allied commander is greeted by General Chase. Signal Corps and newsreel cameras record the impressive but simple ceremony by which the United States becomes undisputed master of a ruthless foe. In General MacArthur's words, this is the payoff. Pearl Harbor is avenged. It is a moment in history no American can ever forget.
Looking at that clip always makes me laugh with the shots of the Japanese school children standing there holding American flags, which they just happened to have as the tanks were rolling by. Nothing like a staged photo. Okay, to the GHQ building. This is the Daiichi Seme insurance building, which the occupation authorities took over, and it became known as the GHQ headquarters, the general headquarters, or GHQ building. The Allies, including over 500,000 soldiers and civilians, moved in and took over governing Japan with their headquarters here in the building that you see. Next photo. The Supreme Commander of the Allied Powers, or SCAP as it was called, was the title held by General Douglas MacArthur, who had led the war effort. Some aerial views of the Daiichi Seme building. And next, the photo with Hirohito. MacArthur can be seen here asserting his authority over Emperor Hirohito, who was consequently compelled to renounce his divinity. The initial goal of the occupation was to transform Japan from a militarist feudal society to a pro-Western modern democracy. MacArthur and the GHQ basically ran Japan for the next 6.5 years. New Constitution. The GHQ purged wartime leaders, disbanded the military, instituted land reform, broke up the big industrial combines known as zaibatsu, strengthened unions, and created a new constitution which gave the right to women to vote for the first time. The old EA system, which made women subservient and gave the male head of the household the power to decree divorce, was eliminated. Okay, the next one, Ginza Crossing. This was the Ginza Crossing at the time in late 1945. Next. On the left is the old Nichigeki building where the Nichigeki Music Hall was located. That's looking down at Skiabashi. What's occupies that site right now is the Hankyu department store. Black markets. Next one. The economy at the time was comprised of the black markets, like the Matsuda Gumi seen here on the right in Shimbashi Station, near Shimbashi Station. Everything sold at the outdoor markets was basically illegal and in violation of strict rationing laws. Much of it came from U.S. military exchanges. The commercial route usually involved GIs buying things like cigarettes and watches at the BX, cigarettes and whiskey at the BX, and then giving it to their Japanese girlfriends, who in turn gave it to their Yakuza-connected Japanese boyfriends. Ueno Market next. This is the Ueno market at the time, which is one of the largest outdoor markets in the country. People were incredibly poor. And we go to the next slide. There was a lot of starvation, and it took massive shipments of food from the United States to save everyone from starvation. Okay, next. As I said, the GHQ ran the country, and among other things, they started the Tokyo war crimes trials, in which the former Prime Minister Hideki Tojo and several others were tried and found guilty and sentenced to death. Next, Bataan. The crimes included the Bataan Death March, in which 75,000 POWs in the Philippines were forced by the Japanese Imperial Army to walk 60 miles from Corregidor to a POW camp at Cabanatuan, north of Manila. Stragglers were shot and killed. Next. Here, the scene on the left of General MacArthur holding the binoculars is General Courtney Whitney, who ran the government section of the GHQ, which was tasked with reforming the Japanese government. A key figure was Colonel Cadiz. He was one of Roosevelt new dealers in the government section. Cadiz was a Harvard and Wall Street lawyer who wielded great influence. He and his in the GHQ, he and his allies aimed to make Japan the Switzerland of Asia, demilitarizing and democratizing the country. Cadiz and his group oversaw the drafting of a new constitution for Japan, empowering women and enabling them to serve in the Diet, the whole political office. Willoughby. But there were conflicts within the GHQ caused by the rise of Mao Zedong in China and the Soviet-style state in North Korea. General Charles Willoughby, also a confidant of MacArthur and a Bataan veteran, commandeered the intelligence wing of the GHQ, known as G2. He rightly feared a communist takeover in Japan and fought against Cadiz and the government section to make Japan a bulwark against communism in China and Asia. Wartime leaders were depurged Zaibats, and the Zaibats were allowed to partially reform. Unions were weakened. To Hattori. Among Willoughby's brainstorms was the creation of a number of secret Japanese subordinate intelligence gathering organizations known as agencies, or kikan in Japanese, which were groups of former military personnel, Japanese and American, to hunt down communist infiltrators and fight the growing communist threat. Many of these kikan contained individuals purged by the government section of the GHQ as a result of their prior classification as war criminals. One of the agencies created was the Hattori Group, led by the former Japan Imperial Army officer, Colonel Takashiro Hitori. He was the man responsible for the Bataan Death March. Among other things, he organized support for an invasion of mainland China by Chiang Kai-shek, and he later plotted to stage a coup d'etat in 1952 and then assassinate the Prime Minister Shigeru Yoshida because of political differences. Okay, Jack Cannon. Perhaps the most interesting, remarkable group was the super secret Cannon Agency, led by an Army explosives expert seen here on the left and former Texas Border Patrol agent named Jack Cannon. Arriving in Japan in September 1945, he blew up the safe at the German embassy and discovered the famous wartime Sergei spy ring was still active. Cannon took the info to Willoughby. The two men hit it off. They both spoke German. Cannon's mother was of German ancestry, and Willoughby was of Prussian descent. Cannon was assigned to stop communist activists and infiltrators in Japan. He assembled a team of 26 men, including several Japanese and Korean Americans, originally called the Z Unit, and based them in Yokohama. I first learned about this group while researching researching Tokyo Underworld, and while doing this book, I was able to interview the last two surviving members of the Cannon Agency, Alonzo Shattuck and Victor Matsui. The Cannon Agency set up shop in the Iwasaki House just off Ueno Park in a complex built by the British architect Joseph Conrad in the 1890s. It was something it was like something out of The Great Gatsby. It's still there if you're interested, by the way. One of the first jobs was to stop the influx of heroin from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, manufactured there by the North Korean government with the twofold aim of selling it in Japan to raise money for the Japan Communist Party and addicting as many American GIs as possible so that the U.S. would be unable to fight the coming war on the Korean Peninsula. Like everything else at the time, the heroin was primarily sold at the outdoor black markets, like the Shimbashi Matsudagumi and the Ueno outdoor marketplace shown here. It was sold openly too. Cannon is shown here with his right-hand man and interpreter Victor Matsui, a Los Angeles native and former amateur sumo champion of the United States. I had no idea there was such a thing as a sumo champion of the United States, but apparently there was. It was a national high school tournament. Matsui, as a Japanese American, spent the early part of World War II in an internment camp in a horse stable in Alabama. One of Cannon's early missions was to infiltrate the DPRK drug trade. They commandeered a boat, outfitted it with several Korean Americans from San Diego who could speak Korean and Japanese, and posed as a tattooed Japanese Yakuza gang. They sailed to Pyongyang and struck a deal with the North Korean government to purchase heroin and resell it in Japan. It was the job of Al Shattuck, shown here, a Cannon agency member from St. Louis, to pick up the heroin when it was delivered. The first load was dropped off by a North Korean fishing boat in a flotation device at the mouth of Tokyo Bay. It consisted of several 1 kilogram aluminum tubes with the English label Red Lion on it. Inside was 99% pure heroin. Processing it back at the Yokohama warehouse, everyone got stoned from the heroin residue powder in the air. Of course, they couldn't sell the product, only store it, so after a while, the North Koreans got suspicious and started dealing with the Yokohama Yakuza group in Nagalakai. After that, the job became one of intercepting shipments. There were shootouts in Nolayama Park in Yokohama and on nearby beaches. Cannon was shot in the leg. Some of you might remember the name Al Shattuck from Tokyo Underworld and his involvement in the Hotel Diamond robbery. He was a contemporary of Nick Sapetti, the main character of Tokyo Underworld, and spent several months in prison in 1956 and 57 as a result of receiving diamonds stolen in the theft. Okay. Cannon was a big 6'2" rugged outdoorsman with considerable charm, and he managed to ingratiate himself with receptionists and other female staff at the Soviet embassy, and even turn a couple of them to the American side. Cannon agents met with them and other spies in midnight assignations in Hibiya Park. They learned to send coded messages of disinformation to the North Koreans. Okay, to the Yakuza boss slide. The Cannon agent also used the ethnic Korean Yakuza like Hisayuki Machi, also known as Ginza Machi, boss of the Toseikai, one of the top Tokyo criminal gangs in the post-war era. He used them to suppress leftist demonstrations in and around the city. Machi once killed a leftist protest leader with his bare hands during a violent demonstration in Ikebukuro. He killed another man in a fight on a train platform in Tokyo Station. On the right is the cover of a best-selling book about Machi's life. The title is Fanso to Yobareta Otoko, the man who is called Fanso. Fanso means violent bull. On the right is a photo of the guns that Cannon used in counterfeit cash that they seized from the North Koreans after cracking the North Korean counterfeiting ring. In general, they prevented the North Koreans from realizing their goal of a communist takeover in Japan. Cannon was an expert with guns. He would set up targets in the backyard of the Iwasaki garden, beer bottles and Coke cans, and he liked to startle firing for target practice, excuse me. He liked to startle new recruits reporting to his office by firing a bullet past their head to see how they would react. The unit's second in command is shown on the left here. His name is Young Jun, a South Korean was a former wartime officer in the Japanese Imperial Navy. He led several espionage missions for the Cannon Agency during the occupation era. Gonzan slide. One of the most daring missions carried out by the Cannon Agency was the raid on Gonzan, a coastal city in North Korea, in February 1950, described by Young in his book on the Cannon Agency. It was prompted here by rumors of an outbreak of bubonic plague at an army hospital there. The UN command wanted to know if there was indeed bubonic plague and if it would spread. If so, Young said in his book, MacArthur wanted to withdraw all U.S. troops from the Korean Peninsula. So Young and his team took a ship up the coast, disembarked on a rubber raft, and made their way into the hospital disguised in North Korean military uniforms. It's a remarkable thing. They extracted a corpse reported to have died of the plague, as well as a live patient believed to have been infected, and brought them back down to the beach. There, an American Army doctor brought along on the mission performed an autopsy on the spot and examined the living patient. As it turned out, however, it wasn't a plague or cholera or typhus for that matter. It was just a virus of some sort. According to Shattuck and Matsui, Young went on to become instrumental in the Incheon landing later that year, after the Korean War had started. Another one of the Cannon Agency's most audacious acts was to kidnap an undercover agent named Kaji Wataru, a well-known writer and Chinese sympathizer. Cannon personally grabbed him off the street in Fujisawa. After stationing an attractive and provocatively dressed woman on the street to distract Wataru's attention, and Cannon hustled him into a waiting car. They kept him in a room at the Iwasaki and helped him recover from tuberculosis, which he unfortunately gave to other Cannon agents, and tried to convert him to the U.S. cause. But the occupation ended shortly after, and Kaji was released. He later testified in the Diet about the Cannon Agency and its activities, including mock executions. Okay. Next. That's Kaji testifying in a Diet session. Let's go to the next one. I'll shorten this a little bit. This is a photo of North Korean soldiers in Tokyo posing as South Korean Army occupation forces, which is really something. Okay, heroin use spiked in Japan in the 1950s, and it was portrayed in Kurosawa's movie High and Low. As it turned out, the Japanese did not like heroin. It made them too lethargic. They were recovering from the war, rebuilding and working around the clock. Cab drivers, construction workers, nightclub hostesses all found crystal meth more useful in staying awake, so the DPRK switched to that. Servicing it was reported in the post-occupation era over 1 million crystal meth addicts. Their crystal meth product proved superior to Hiropon, which you can see in the above right picture. It was a methamphetamine produced by the Japanese government during the war for kamikaze pilots and other fighting forces, and was available in the post-war era at drugstores. You could walk in and buy it. But it gave users severe headaches and caused blackouts, which the superior North Korean crystal meth product did not. Okay, next. The occupation ended April 1952. The Cannon Agency was shut down around the same time, and the CIA moved in, newly formed CIA moved in and took over its operations. Cannon returned to the States, and he was seen in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963, the date of JFK's assassination, working for the CIA. He was reportedly one of the riflemen. He accidentally shot and killed himself building a gun, a Glazer safety gun. Okay. Charles Cadies. As it turned out, another activity of the Cannon Agency during the occupation was helping Willoughby spy on his rival, the Roosevelt New Dealer, Colonel Charles Cadies, who was deputy chief of the government section. Cadies had been in charge of drafting the new post-war constitution for Japan, which was promulgated in 1947. But Willoughby thought him a communist because he supported socialist causes and sought to destroy him. Next. As it so happened, Cadies was having an affair with the Viscountess Torio, wife of the Viscount Torio, a member of the imperial family. Seen here that was the beach at Kamakura. Some people thought that the imperial family had used the Viscountess as a kind of undercover agent to seduce Cadies and persuade him that the emperor should not be prosecuted in the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal. But nevertheless, romance blossomed. Willoughby wanted to use evidence of the secret romance to destroy Cadies' career in Japan. So he contacted Willoughby on the phone here. He contacted MacArthur and he said, "Sir, in the occupation policy manual, there's nothing that indicates that it's all right to occupy the wife of another man. Also, I might add that Cadies already has a wife." MacArthur was famous for saying of his men in Japan that they could Madame Butterfly themselves to death for all I care. He was not moved to action. So Willoughby did the best thing he could think of to ruin Cadies' career. He sent a report to Cadies' wife in New York, who made a hasty trip to Tokyo to confront her husband. She returned to the States and filed for divorce. Showa Denko bribery scandal of November 1948 just made things worse. It caused the fall of the Prime Minister Ashida's pro-socialist government, which Cadies had strongly supported, and 63 people were arrested and indicted for bribery, including, next one, the Prime Minister Shito Ashida and Kozo Hinohara, the president of the Showa Denko Company, a major chemical company. This is one of the largest scandals in the history of Japanese politics and government. The charges were bribery relating to loans from the so-called Restructured Finance Bank, and there were accusations of involvement by GHQ personnel relating to entertainment expenses being wined and dined by the Japanese government officials. Torio's husband, apparently, who was dealing in automobile imports, tried to get a loan from this reconstruction and refinancing bank and discovered there was no money. So he asked his wife to investigate, and one thing led to another, and this is how the scandal unfolded. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. The mistress of the president of the Showa Denko Company, who was a geisha, went to visit Torio at her boutique on the Ginza, carrying a suitcase full of money to give to Cadies, for her to give to Cadies to secure Hinohara's release. Torio refused to cooperate, saying that Cadies wasn't that kind of man. But Willoughby's spies, who were watching and following everything that she did, that Torio did, spread the word about the Showa Denko mistress and the suitcase full of money, and Cadies' reputation was damaged. He left Japan shortly thereafter. Torio and Katie's didn't meet again for another 12 years until a brief, ill-fated rendezvous in New York City. She was seriously in love with him, and she went back to see him, and she stayed at the Hilton Hotel in Midtown. But Katie's didn't want to see her, so he kept postponing the meeting until the last night, and then he took her out to dinner, and then he dropped her off at the hotel and said goodbye. She was reportedly devastated. Okay. This is a photo of the Latin Quarter. The CIA took over from the Cannon Agency at the end of the occupation and threw its support behind the conservative Japanese leaders to fight the growing anti-communist movement in Japan. It began bankrolling right-wing politicians and would soon be dispersing the amazing amount of $1 million a month to the Liberal Democratic Party. It funneled it through visiting American businessmen and other figures. An interesting locus of activity in this regard was the Latin Quarter nightclub, the first Western-style nightclub to appear in Japan after the war, one with a notorious rotation. The club was managed by Al Shattuck, young Al Shattuck, seen here on the left, with his wife, the singer Doris Lee. Shattuck, if you call us, the one who picked up the heroin from Tokyo Bay, is a Cannon Agency member. His partner, Ted Lewin, next one, was Ted Lewin, a former boxer and mafia gambler who had an amazing life story. A former light heavyweight who had an aptitude for gambling, Lewin worked the floating casinos off the coast of LA during the 1930s. He was wanted by LA police for various offenses, including murder. He fled to Shanghai, then Manila, where he opened a very successful nightclub and casino. Next. When the Japanese invaded the Philippines, Lewin joined the U.S. Army, and he was captured at Corregidor. Next. He endured the Bataan Death March as a POW in the Philippines, and later Omuta mines in Fukuoka, where prisoners were treated brutally. He ingratiated himself by teaching his captors blackjack, poker, casino roulette, and other forms of American gambling. And in exchange, he secured food and medical treatment for fellow POWs. This eventually earned him the Medal of Freedom, awarded by MacArthur at war's end. Lewin testified at the Tokyo War Crimes Trial. Next slide. And then relieved many high-ranking GHQ officers of their savings in private high-stakes backroom poker games in Tokyo hotels, including games at Jack Cannon's Iwasaki House. He opened a Latin Quarter with Shattuck, moving on to relieving wealthy Tokyoites of their money in after-hours gambling. Let's move ahead to the Yoshio Kodama. The owner of the Latin Quarter property was Yoshio Kodama, an infamous ultranationalist who had pillaged China during the war for the Tojo cabinet and amassed a considerable private fortune in the process, which he used to fund the foundation of the Liberal Democratic Party. There's a story about when the Japanese had to withdraw from China during World War II. Kodama had filled this private airplane with all sorts of diamond and gold bars and platinum and cash. It was so heavy that the wheels broke on the airplane and had to be reinforced. He brought this back to Japan, and he buried it in the backyards of his friends in high political circles. And then he used that money to fund the formation of the Liberal Democratic Party in 1955, which went on to rule Japan for the next 80 years. They're still running it today. Next one. Kodama was arrested by the Americans as a Class A war crime suspect. He reportedly bought his freedom with part of the fortune that he had plundered from China and a promise to cooperate with Americans. He was released on the day that Hideki Tojo and 7 others were hanged. He went on to work for the CIA. So all in all, this was a remarkable correlation or coalition at this. Go to the next picture. At the Latin Quarter, where you had a mafia boss, an ultranationalist, Yoshio Kodama, who was also considered the godfather of the Japanese Yakuza, CIA agents, and this Yakuza gangster, Machihisa Yuki, provided security. It was one of the most remarkable coalitions in the history of post-war Japan. Okay, next. Go to Kishi. Machi went on to become the crime boss of Tokyo, and he basically ran the Tokyo underworld for until the 1977 Lockheed scandal brought him down. Released, this is Nobusuke Kishi. He was a former cabinet minister in the Tojo cabinet who ran Manchuria during the pre-war and wartime years. He himself had been arrested as a Class A war crime suspect, but he was released from Sagamo prison along with Kodama for agreeing to cooperate with the Americans. He used the funds that the CIA had donated to the Liberal Democratic Party to have himself named prime minister and rule Japan. The CIA supported him on the condition that he would support the ongoing maintenance of American bases in Japan. At the time, there were something like 180,000 U.S. soldiers stationed all over Japan. And this was part of the deal that kept him in power and kept the money from the Americans flowing into the Liberal Democratic Party via the CIA. Next slide. This was a secret that wasn't revealed until the early 1990s in the New York Times that the CIA was paying all this money under the table to the LDP. Okay, next one. Kodama, Lewin, and Shattuck had a falling out in 1956. Kodama wanted to shut down the Latin Quarter complex, which is located. The site is in Akasaka, right across the street from the Akasaka Mitsuke subway station. There's a big insurance building at this place now. But Shattuck wanted to put up the Hotel New Japan in preparation for the Tokyo 1964 Olympics. Shattuck and Lewin said no. They refused to vacate the lease. So the Latin Quarter experienced an accidental fire which shut it down permanently. Lewin, whose other Tokyo casinos had been raided by the police, had fallen out of favor with the CIA and was deported along with Lee and Shattuck, who spent several months, after spending several months in Kosuge prison in the Tokyo Detention Center for his involvement in the Imperial Hotel diamond robbery. Next one. But Kodama earned his money from the Americans. He came in handy during the massive protests against the extension of the U.S.-Japan Mutual Security Treaty, keeping U.S. bases in Japan. These were student demonstrations. This is the Zengakuren, next slide. The movers and shakers of this demonstration were this powerful anti-communist student movement. Or more anti-American is a better description. And the protests there were over 1 million people protesting at one time in the streets of Tokyo, including average citizens who didn't like the ideas of American bases being in Japan. So, next one, the slides. So the plan was for this, the extension of the security treaty was due to expire in May 1960. The security treaty is the agreement between the U.S. and Japan that kept American soldiers on bases on Japanese soil. And the idea was for the treaty to be signed, and then Eisenhower would fly to Japan, and he and Hirohito would ride in an open car into the U.S. Embassy as a way of demonstrating U.S.-Japan friendship. Eisenhower sent his press secretary, James Hagerty, on an advance mission, and Hagerty was attacked at Haneda Airport. His car was surrounded by angry leftists demonstrating, and he had to be rescued by a helicopter. So the Japanese and American governments were worried about sending MacArthur in that kind of atmosphere. So Kodama put together this army of 25,000 Yakuza and right-wing youth to fight the leftists and ensure passage of the treaty. One plan called for the men to be stationed on either side of the road from Haneda to the U.S. Embassy every 3 meters, armed with bamboo staves. But the American government decided that wouldn't be a very good look for U.S.-style democracy, so they canceled Eisenhower's trip. But the treaty was passed on the night of May 20th, 1960, and the furiously angry students were demonstrating outside. So the boss of the Inagawa-kai, which is the third most powerful Yakuza gang in Japan, was inside with his men barricading the door so that the students could not get in. And so the Diet approved the extension of the security treaty, and then life went on as normal the next day. Okay, the Moonies. An interesting aside, which has ramifications today, the CIA had helped establish a small religious group from Korea, the Unification Church, established by Reverend Moon. The CIA liked the Moonies, as they were called in some circles, because they were pro-family and strongly anti-communist. The KCIA, which was established with the help of the CIA, the Korean Central Intelligence Agency, were the people that spotted the UC and recommended them to the Americans. And several directors of the KCIA became directors of the Korean Unification Church. So at the CIA's urging, Kishi supported the Unification Church. His wife became an avid supporter, and the Tokyo headquarters of the UC, as it was called, was located next to the Shibuya residence of Kishi and his wife. Many LDP members joined the church, and the Unification Church provided support for them at election time. Next, this relationship would later come back to haunt the Kishi family when Kishi's grandson, former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who was gunned down in 2022 by a young man burning with hatred for the church because they bankrupted his family through repeated requests for big donations. One of the great ironies of history. Okay, I think we can stop here and take some questions. There are other chapters that I can talk about, but this is taking a lot of time, so we need time for Q&A.
Moving on to the Q&A portion. First question comes from Jeff. He said, I don't really know much about the Yakuza, but it's so surprising to me that there were Korean Yakuza bosses in Japan. Is or was this common? And or is this an outlier?
Well, the Koreans, they were, if my memory serves me correctly, there was something like 2 million Koreans in Japan at the end of World War II. Japan had colonized Korea in 1905, and a lot of Koreans were brought to Japan as slave workers. And so at the end of the war, there were 2 million, and uh, I think one third of them went back to South Korea. Another third went to North Korea. They went where their relatives were. And a third stayed in Japan. They didn't particularly want to go. They liked, where they were. They were given, special dispensation by the government. The ethnic Koreans had historically been discriminated against, and they were even after World War II. They couldn't get into, certain universities or companies if their Korean background was known. So a lot of them turned to the gangs, and North Korea was manufacturing all these drugs, and so they used their relatives back in North Korea to help import the drugs, go out to the beaches in the mouth of Tokyo Bay and pick up the Red Lion heroin. Uh, so I forget the ratio, but something like, 20, 30% were Koreans, but don't quote me on that. I'd have to check it, but it was quite substantial.
Thank you so much. The next question comes from William Yale. So, Mr. Whiting, can you speak to the U.S. co-optation of Unit 731 after the war? Apparently, some former members of Unit 731 worked for the U.S. in Yokosuka during the Korean War.
I don't know. Sorry, I don't know very much about 731. There's some excellent books about it, but I'm not an expert, and I would just wind up saying the wrong thing, so I'd rather not say anything. So.
Thank you. The next question, it comes from Peggy Kanda. Right during the early years of the SCAP, SCAP, was there really a North Korea, not a single Korea?
The Korea split in two in 1948. The South Korea was supported by the Americans, and North Korea was supported by the Soviets, the Russians, and that led to the outbreak of the Korean War in 1950. But the two separate states were formed in 1948.
So the next question comes from Scott Warren. I understand from someone involved in the distribution of US aid to Japan right after the war that the Yakuza became a key way for the distribution of food because there was no trust of food from the US. The US would drop off crates of food, and then a few minutes after leaving, the Yakuza would come and pick it up. Did you ever hear much about this?
Well, the Japanese would come and steal it would be a better description because they were stealing, they were selling uniforms from the Japanese Imperial Army warehouse and all sorts of goods and clothing and other items. They just raided the warehouse because nobody was guarding it. The war was over and sold on the black market. I, What was the question? Did the Japanese?
Did you hear about the Yakuza picking up the food and distributing what the U.S. had dropped, the U.S. aid that had been dropped into Japan?
Well, they distributed, they sold it on the black market for outrageous prices. I wouldn't say they distributed it. I mean, they were trying to, cultivate and keep a customer base. You hear stories about Yakuza helping the local citizenry after the earthquake in Kobe and the one in uh, Fukushima. When people were destitute, the Yakuza came in with food and clothing. But as one gang boss explained it to me, he said they wanted to keep their customer base intact. So, because they could keep selling them drugs and other items. So there's nothing benevolent that Yakuza do. It's all for, personal private. They like the idea that they're being, they're the Robin Hoods of Japan, as some people have described them, that they work for the benefit of common people. But it's basically just, see as much money as they can squeeze out of you as possible. They're not very altruistic people in my experience.
I
They're
see.
not the Red Cross.
I see. Thank you so much. If it's okay, I would like to ask one quick final question to kind of, I guess, sum up your book. So the title of your book, Gamblers, Fraudsters, Dreamers, and Spies, The Outsiders Who Shaped Modern Japan. I realize we only got to a certain section of your book, not even the complete book, but from all of that you have written within your book, who do you think, in your opinion, is the maybe one of the most poignant or the most important person that you wrote about who's an outsider who shaped Japan?
Jeez. I Well, I would say somebody like Ted Lewin, who introduced gambling, American casino style gambling to Japan. That's all the underground casinos that the Yakuza have now in Japan are all based on the Ted Lewin model. On the other hand, I prefer somebody like Tom Blakemore, who translated the criminal code of Japan and a couple of other books on Japanese law, and he helped establish the I House and the International House in Tokyo. And he was decorated by the emperor, given one of their top awards for his contributions to Japanese society. There's another guy named Ray Bushell, another lawyer who came during the occupation, who developed, who became a collector of Netscape. And he developed one of the world's most expensive collections of Netscape, worth millions of dollars, and wrote several books about it. And before he died, he donated it all to the LA County Museum. Somebody like him. He was very jealous of Blakemore because Blakemore got an award from the emperor and he didn't, and he kept complaining about that. But there are people like that. The Wolfhound founder who developed an orphanage after the war for Japanese orphans. I should have written about him, but he's not in the book. I think I mentioned him in a couple paragraphs, but I personally find crime interesting. One of the themes of this book and my other book, Tokyo Underworld, is how crime unifies people across cultures. Greed, it sort of helps eliminate cultural differences if you're after making as much money as you can. So as the great stories of alliances between Japanese and Americans that involve crime. But, just so people wouldn't say that I'm obsessed with crime, I had put in a chapter about Tom Blakemore. I knew him and his wife. His wife was a patron of the Japanese art. She wrote many books about Japanese artists and introduced their work to the West. She established a Fresnel gallery in the Hotel Okuda. I think Carlos Ghosn really single-handedly saved Nissan, made them into one of the world's greatest automakers. I think he really got screwed. to be graphic about it. I don't think he broke any laws. I don't think he did anything wrong. The Japanese executives just wanted to stop a merger that the French government wanted to have between Renault and Nissan. But that's written about in detail. There's a chapter on Greg Kelly, who was arrested along with Carlos Ghosn, and spent several weeks, months in a Japanese prison. I'm doing a book with Greg Kelly that's coming out next year. I guess that's it. Baseball, if we get into that, Bobby Valentine, really contributed a lot, I think. He's another one who was, too successful. People around him got jealous of all the attention he was getting and the money he was making, so they drove him out. The Bobby Valentine story and the Nissan Carlos Ghosn story are basically the same story. One's about automobiles and the other's about baseball, but you read them both, you can see they're back to back in the book. But Tom Blakemore the lawyer, was the most impressive person. He used to walk around with kanji cards in his hand. And he was constantly learning, even after being in Japan for 20, 30 years and passing the bar exam, he was constantly studying new Japanese kanji. It was fun. He was fluent in Japanese, but he spoke it in this really thick Oklahoma accent. Konnichiwa, minasan. It was very distinct. But he was a great guy. Getting to meet him was, I think, the best thing that happened to me out of all the books that I've done.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Whiting. I really appreciate you taking the time to introduce part of your book and also answer some of our questions. So for our audience, if you want to learn more about some of the people that Mr. Whiting has covered today or others who have not been mentioned, I will post the links for his book in both Amazon Japan and US Amazon in the chat. So please purchase those books and read more about what was not covered today, unfortunately, during our time. But thank you once again, Mr. Whiting, for your time, taking time out of your day to be with us. We apologize for the technical difficulties, but we thank you for your kindness and your cooperation. Everyone, thank you so much for also, being patient with us today as well. That's all for today. Once again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We hope to see you next month on December 11th. Please come out to all of the community conversations events that will be taking place tomorrow and in the next couple of days. Also, please support our CFC campaign. And I hope to see you all again very soon. Thank you. Bye.
FadTech's IT support and mobile internet service helps make events like this one possible. Thank you.